me and Mom. Dad left when I was really young, so he's just a faded memory. Mom worked really hard, juggling multiple jobs to keep us going and make sure I could do well in school. Because of her sacrifices, I got a scholarship that paid for college, so I didn't have to deal with the huge debt many people have these days. I studied business management, driven by a mix of ambition and fear of being as poor as we were when I was a kid. After graduating, I moved to the city. It was tough at first, living in a tiny apartment and eating cheap noodles more often than I'd like to admit. But I landed a job at a big company, starting as a junior and quickly moving up the ranks. A few years later, I wasn't just working there, I was running a whole department. It was more than a job to me, it was my domain. I made sure everyone on my team knew they were valued. During training sessions, I tell the newbies, lead with respect. Treat this job like you own it, and soon you'll be leading the team. The team was great, full of good people. When I got promoted to department head, we all went to a local bar to celebrate. It wasn't a fancy place, just a cozy spot with cold beer and lots of laughs. Here's to Maud, the boss lady. Simon, one of my oldest colleagues, raised his glass. Everyone joined in, clinking their glasses together. Thanks, guys, we're all in this together. Here's to kicking more ass and taking names, I shouted, and the team cheered back. That night, amidst all the celebration, I noticed a guy named Austin. He saw me looking and walked over with a confident grin. Couldn't help but notice the celebration. What's the occasion? He asked, leaning against the bar. Just a little career boost, I replied with a smile. I'm the new head of my department now, I said, trying not to sound too boastful. That's impressive. Must be a tough job, he replied, nodding appreciatively. I'm Austin, by the way. Maud. Nice to meet you, Austin. We started talking more seriously than I had planned. It turned out Austin was a financier and knew his way around numbers, just like I knew my way around project plans. Over the next 5 months, our casual dates turned into weekends together. Before long, I was spending more time at his place than my own. He had an amazing apartment with high ceilings, a view that made you want to show it off, and a warmth that my dingy rental couldn't match. One evening, as we looked at the city lights from his balcony, Austin turned to me with a serious look on his usually playful face. He took my hands, and I could feel his nervous energy. Maud, these past months with you have been the best of my life. I know this might seem fast, but when you know, you just know, right? He started, his voice a mix of certainty and hope. I nodded, the cityscape blurring as my heart raced. He pulled out a small box from his jacket and opened it to reveal a ring that sparkled in the light. Will you marry me, Maud? Yes, Austin, absolutely yes, I managed, my voice thick with emotion. And just like that, I was engaged to a man who truly saw me and loved all the parts of me, even the tough ones. The day I was supposed to meet Austin's parents, my stomach was in knots. As Austin drove us up to a sprawling mansion with a driveway longer than my entire apartment block, I realized they were more than well off, they were rich. Stepping out of the car, I felt the weight of the place. The house looked like something out of an old British movie, all brick and ivy with gargoyles staring down like they knew I didn't belong. Austin squeezed my hand as we walked up to the huge oak doors. You'll be fine, Maud, he whispered, but his voice sounded like he was trying to convince himself too. The door swung open, and there stood Mr. and Mrs. Michael. His suit probably cost more than my rent, and her dress was something you'd see in a magazine. The foyer was massive, with a sparkling chandelier overhead. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking people with titles like Sir and Lady. Maud, lovely to finally meet you, Mrs. Michael said. I'm Maxime, and this is my wife, Sydney, Mr. Michael said, his voice smooth but cool with a hint of a practiced English accent. Mrs. Michael gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Pleased to meet you both, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady as we moved into the dining room. Austin whispered quick tips about which fork to use, but his words were a jumble in my head. Dinner was served, and it felt like sitting in a freezer. The air was so cold with judgment. Mr. Michael pointed to a portrait of a stern-looking man with a thick beard. "That's Sir Daniel Michael, a direct ancestor from Canada. He came over in the 1500s to establish our family here," he said proudly. "Really impressive," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic, but it was hard to eat when I felt like every move was being critiqued. I reached for what I thought was the salad fork, but the silence that followed told me I'd messed up. I glanced at Austin for help, but before he could whisper anything, Mrs. Michael's voice cut through. "Perhaps things are done differently where you come from, dear," she said, each word sharp and precise. "Sorry, still getting the hang of all this," I mumbled, my cheeks burning hot. Austin tried to smooth things over by jumping into a story about us, but his parents were more interested in watching me struggle with the dessert spoon next. I felt smaller with each course, their stares heavy on my shoulders. After the icy dinner, we all shuffled into the Michaels' expansive living room. The plush carpets and heavy curtains made the room feel even more suffocating than the dining hall. I sunk into one of the ornate chairs, feeling like I was an exhibit in a museum about commoners. Mrs. Michael, perched elegantly on the edge of her seat, leaned forward. "Maud, dear, tell us more about your family. Your upbringing must have been quite different from ours," she said. I hesitated, feeling Austin's tense gaze on me. "Well, it was mostly just me and my mom. My dad left when I was really young, and I don't remember him much. Mom did everything to raise me on her own. She's a nurse." The room fell silent. Mrs. Michael stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood floor like a scream. "This is unacceptable," she declared, her voice resonating with disgust. "We are descendants of an ancient English lineage. We have standards, traditions. I cannot and will not allow my only son to marry someone without pedigree or knowledge of her own lineage." Mr. Michael, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. His words were calculated, each one heavy with meaning. "It's essential for us that our family ties are strong and well documented. Maud, can you even name your great-grandparents?" I felt my face heat up with embarrassment. "I only know about my maternal grandparents," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Michael rolled his eyes, showing his contempt. "This is exactly what we feared," he muttered under his breath. Austin finally intervened, his tone firm yet pleading. "Mom, Dad, please. Maud is kind, hardworking, and she loves me. Isn't that what should matter?" His mother's gaze was steely. "Respect and adherence to our family standards are what matter, John. If Maud is to join this family, she must learn our ways. She needs to respect where she is coming from, even if it is nowhere significant." Their words stung, cutting through the warm feelings from earlier in the evening. But Austin was looking at me, his eyes begging me to just go along with it. I nodded reluctantly, agreeing to their terms. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll learn about your family and your traditions." Mrs. Michael seemed somewhat pleased by my concession. "Good. You'll start by familiarizing yourself with our family tree and understanding who each person in those portraits is. It's not just about names, Maud. It's about respect for our lineage." As they continued talking about their expectations, I felt a part of me shrivel up. The evening had turned from a simple meet and greet into a trial by fire. I had agreed to their demands, yes, but at what cost? As the room filled with discussions of ancestors and noble deeds, I couldn't help but feel alienated from these people and, oddly enough, from the parts of Austin that were tied so tightly to them. The weeks following that stiff dinner were a whirlwind. I barely had time to catch my breath between working my day job and attending the slew of etiquette and style courses that Mr. and Mrs. Michael insisted I take. My day started with the buzz of an alarm before sunrise and ended long after the sun had set, leaving me feeling like a zombie. "Elbows off the table, Maud," the etiquette instructor gently chided during one of our sessions. And remember, the soup spoon moves away from you